This was a perfect day to have me. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here.
So great to see you. And by the way, we can catch you at 4 p.m. on the Fox Business Network.
Indeed, yeah, with Melissa Francis.
Yeah, and Miss Kennedy as well.
Yep,
8 p.m. tonight,
absolutely.
we'll be tackling this stuff with gusto.
We'll
All right, we're back here tomorrow at noon Eastern. Join us every weekday at noon. Outnumbered Overtime with Harris Faulkner starts right now.
And we'll start with a Fox News alert. We could see them walk into court. Maybe, maybe not. We don't know yet, but here's who. President Trump's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, and his close associate are set to appear before a federal judge. A federal grand jury has indicted them on 12 counts as part of special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Let's go Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. Right now, we're awaiting the start of the daily press briefing at the White House. We expect new reaction from the administration to today's sweeping events, the first time we will have heard officially from the White House since this happened. Paul Manafort and his business associate, Rick Gates, were indicted on charges of conspiracy and money laundering. Both men scheduled to appear before that federal judge I mentioned. It should happen at the bottom of the hour. All this as the president is appearing to distance himself from Manafort, tweeting this morning. Sorry, but this is years ago, before Paul Manafort was part of the Trump campaign. But why aren't crooked Hillary and the Dems the focus? Also, there is no collusion. End of tweet. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us now live from the press briefing room. John? No, you're right outside the White House. I don't know why the script says that. I can see you.
Apologies, Harris. The briefing has been delayed for 15 minutes, so we thought we'll come out here where we can have a little more intimate setting with you as opposed to the cacophony of the Brady briefing room. We had heard from sources close to the president that his response today would likely be to say he feels bad for Paul Manafort and his family, but reiterate that Manafort, the charges at least that have been leveled against Manafort and Rick Gates have nothing to do with the Trump campaign. It seems that the president, right at this moment at least, only responding to the Trump campaign part of that with that Twitter statement that you read out just a short time ago. We will see the president later this afternoon about 5:45 when he hosts Halloween at the White House. Don't know if he'll have anything to say about this, but as you pointed out, we will be hearing from Sarah Huckabee Sanders very soon. You know, the one thing that this does is it makes the Mueller investigation, which has sort of been this thing conducted behind closed doors, and we get a little bit of news here every once in a while. It's made it much more real than it has in the past, not just with Manafort, but with George Papadopoulos, who is the foreign policy advisor, an unpaid position, I'm told, who pled guilty for lying to FBI agents who interviewed him back in January of this year. That's is that Manafort you see there? I believe that's Manafort you see there. But at any rate, Papadopoulos was a person who was in the company of the president during at least one foreign policy meeting, though I'm told that his position was unpaid and that he was really a peripheral player, and that anything that he suggested about trying to get together the president together with Vladimir Putin really went nowhere. The campaign never took him up on his offer. Certainly sources who are supporters of the president continue to stand at his side, and there you see a picture of George Papadopoulos there in that foreign policy meeting. Jeff Sessions, who recused himself from the Russia investigation, the far left, the president up there on the far right. Trump loyalists, though, zeroing in on reports that Manafort has been under investigation since 2014, might have even been wiretapped after the approval of a FISA court. Corey Lewandowski, who was his campaign manager at the time, by the way, that Papadopoulos was one of the foreign policy advisors, speaking out this morning on the Fox Business Channel. Listen here.
If the public reports are true, and there was a time where Paul Manafort was under a FISA warrant before coming to the Trump campaign, why is it the FBI never reached out to me as the campaign manager, never reached out to Donald Trump and said, look, you might want to pause for a second and take a look before you bring this guy on board as a volunteer to hunt delegates for you? They never did that. He was under a FISA warrant supposedly both before and after his tenure at the campaign, and the FBI never notified the leading presidential candidate for a major Republican Party race, never notified him of a potential problem. This is a problem with the FBI, if you ask me.
And Democrats also weighing in on the Manafort and Gates indictment. Senator Chuck Schumer saying, quote, the president must not under any circumstances interfere with the special counsel's work in any way. If he does so, Congress must respond swiftly, unequivocally, and in a bipartisan way to ensure that the investigation continues. Sources familiar, though, with all of this say that the president's got no interest in interfering with Mueller, nor does he want him to recuse himself in any way from this investigation based on the Uranium One deal. Their interest here at the White House is to see this brought to a conclusion just as quickly as Mueller possibly can. Harris?
Yeah, you know, I'm still taking notes on what Corey Lewandowski said in a different way, because I watched it when he said it, but now it's hitting me. He's got an excellent point. What would have kept the FBI from notifying him? I mean, there they are. The campaign should be vetting the people that they're hiring. You mentioned Papadopoulos maybe didn't have an actual salary, but he's certainly on board to do something with the group. They're trying to vet people, and that information would have been not just helpful, but critical.
I mean, it might, you know, Lewandowski's making the point that here is a person who might become president of the United States, and this is critical information that the president might have wanted to know for national security purposes. But from the way I know that the FBI operates, for the most part, they are after the target of the investigation. And I don't know if they're making any kind of a determination as to whether or not this could have been critical to national security. But at that time, it would appear, at the very least, Harris, that they were after the targets of the investigation and not whether or not telling Donald Trump about it, who was candidate Donald Trump at the time, would have been beneficial to Trump.
All right, John Roberts outside on the White House lawn as we await that press briefing to come up inside the White House moments from now. Thank you. For more on this, let's bring in my guest, Tom Dupree. He served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General under President George W. Bush, and he joins us now from Washington. Great to see you today, and I appreciate your expertise on this, Tom. Let's start with the issue, if we can, of the actual indictment, because it's being written about by people who are analysts and others that it really doesn't have anything to do with the man who now sits in the White House. Your thoughts?
I think that's a fair analysis, Harris. My sense on this is, look, this was Bob Mueller's opening salvo, and it's obviously extremely significant that Manafort was indicted. But at the same time, I think it's notable about what the indictment does not say. In other words, there's nothing in this indictment that links the Russians to the Trump campaign. They certainly talk a lot about things that Manafort did long before he came into the Donald Trump universe. But the key piece of this that we haven't seen yet is that link that links what Manafort did in Russia with the Russians to the Trump campaign or to the president himself.
If you were to sit across from Paul Manafort, Rick Gates today, as a judge is going to, and we're learning more about this judge, by the way, she was the person, Judge Robinson of the D.C. courts was the person who, Marion Barry, remember him, D.C. mayor back in the 80s and 90s, pleaded guilty to tax evasion in front of her in her courtroom. What would you ask Manafort and Gates? What would you be looking for today? And what are we expecting in this appearance arraignment type situation?
Well, I think today's hearing is going to be somewhat anticlimactic. There's always the possibility that Manafort and Gates will have to kind of run through the media scrum to get to the courthouse and that sort of thing. But from a legal perspective, today's hearing is going to be anticlimactic. I would anticipate that they will enter an initial plea of not guilty, and the prosecutorial engines will start firing up from that point. So we will see over the next few months a lot of pressure being brought to bear on these defendants to enter a plea agreement and cooperate with the special counsel, to tell them everything that they know in exchange for a reduced sentence. That is what the spotlight is going to be on over the next few months, about whether Manafort and Gates are willing to tell their story in exchange for leniency.
What impression does it make on you that we've already seen one guilty plea, albeit it wasn't about what he did, but actually not being truthful, George Papadopoulos, who worked with the campaign?
Right. What that tells me is that a lot of it is just when you meet with these federal agents, if you haven't done anything wrong, or frankly, even if you have done something wrong, you need to be 100% honest. Today's unsealing of that plea agreement shows that what he ultimately pled guilty to was not any sort of underlying substantive violation of the espionage laws or conspiring with the Russians or anything like that. Instead, it was just telling falsehoods to federal agents. And that is the key here, is that once you have federal agents beginning an investigation, asking you questions, you need to take those extremely seriously so that you don't make a misstep like seems to have happened in this case and say something that's false when you need to be telling the truth.
And how much could that cost him?
Well, it certainly has already cost him in that he's had to plead. I think what the bigger question here is with that plea agreement is, does he have more information to share with Mueller? This is someone who had some connection to the campaign. It appears that he was an unpaid advisor. This was not a traditional campaign in any stretch of the word, and there's a universe of people who claim they were advisors when they were really very far removed from the candidate himself. The question is, what knowledge does he have, and has he shared it with Mueller?
So that's where I want to take you next. So this special prosecutor, special counsel, seems to have gone far afield from where he originally started. And sometimes investigations, he certainly has the right, as I've been reading, to do that, to follow the trail, if you will. But that means you have to tell certain people what they should and shouldn't do. What would you advise the president at this point?
Well, I would advise the president, number one, to make sure that his people are fully cooperating, because as we were saying earlier, once you get in the business of starting to conceal information from investigators, you could run a risk of finding to have violated the law in that respect. So number one is total honesty, total cooperation. And the idea here is the president, it's in his best interest, in my view, to ensure that Mueller can wrap this investigation up quickly. The more this gets dragged out, the more you see people connected to the campaign being brought in for questioning under oath. Who knows what can happen? And that will cause Mueller to expand the scope of his investigation. The president and the White House need to keep this thing narrow. They need to keep it on track, and they need to do everything within their power to ensure that Mueller wraps this thing up in a prompt manner.
Former Deputy Assistant Attorney General for George W. Bush, Tom Dupree, thank you very much for being with us as this news is breaking on this Monday afternoon. Appreciate it. Let's bring in Chief Political Anchor and Anchor of Special Report, Bret Baier. Now, Bret, always good to see you. So this is happening right before us now. We saw the unsealing of those indictments. Now we know a little bit of what's going on in the course. You saw Tom Dupree and others this morning, Bret, saying the president, no tweeting, no talking, just kind of sitting still. What are we hearing from the Hill where you are?
Well, a couple of things, Harris. It'll be interesting to watch this briefing live here on Fox to see how the White House handles it, all the questions that will be coming. I think Tom handled it very well as far as what the indictments on Manafort and Gates show us. They are financial related, and they are, many of them, years before the campaign. However, it does stretch into the campaign, meaning that that activity on the financial side for Manafort, the feds are alleging was continuing while he was campaign manager. So that's at least somewhat significant. I think that the bigger storyline, if you're looking at any connection to Russia, is the Papadopoulos plea and the fact that he clearly is cooperating with Mueller and his investigators. He was charged, he was arrested in the end of July, and then made the guilty plea in early October, and he is facing what the plea says between 0 and 6 months for lying to federal investigators. That means that, you know, they're giving him an easy ride to get his cooperation, and that obviously raises eyebrows.
Well, and what Tom Dupree was just saying, you know, his cooperation in the form of information. What can they tell us about what's going on in the campaign? You know, Bret, one of the things that we haven't touched on yet this hour, but I know is a looming issue, is the idea of how this information got leaked and the importance of that. Your thoughts?
Well, that's true. I think that that's a part of it. Sometimes grand jury indictments do get leaked. Sometimes that is illegal. Other times it is the way in which the people under investigation are told, and then it gets out that way. So I think that that'll be a part of, you know, the questions that are asked. You were talking about breaking news, Harris. Politico, just in the past few minutes, is reporting that Democratic power lobbyist Tony Podesta, founder of the Podesta Group, the lobbying group that bears his name,
the
is
brother
stepping
of John
down.
Podesta.
The brother of John Podesta is stepping down from the head of that lobbying group. He is, we're told, under investigation by the special counsel, Robert Mueller. So how that all factors in, and the fact that Tony Podesta is stepping down from the Podesta Group, is a significant development just in the past few minutes.
So if there have been those questions, as people, critics who are wondering, in defense of the White House saying the president is not under investigation, we heard Governor Chris Christie say that he hadn't heard anything different since it was first reported that he's not under investigation. When you hear them say, well, would Mueller be taking a look at the other side of the political aisle? Does this become more about justice, and when does it, and less about politics?
Yeah, I think that shows at least an interesting development about that Mueller is looking at that. I do think that we don't know what we don't know. I always say that on this special counsel investigation, but these are just crumbs from what we're told of what Mueller may be going down. I think the bigger thing on Capitol Hill is the effort to prevent the president from getting rid of the special counsel. Senator Leahy and others are trying to draft something that would somehow prohibit the president from firing Robert Mueller. As John Roberts said, he says he doesn't want to do that or hasn't thought about it, but they're trying to get that in stone up on Capitol Hill. Again,
you bring us the news. Tony Podesta has stepped down. It's an interesting development. We'll continue to follow the trail here. Brett Baer, we'll see you at 6 p.m. Eastern with Special Report. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Harris.
All right, so back to what we're watching now. You see the lectern there at the White House press briefing room, and we're waiting for Sarah Sanders to step up, the press secretary, and talk today for the first time from the White House in reaction to Paul Manafort and his business associate, former campaign chair for Trump, campaign then, Paul Manafort, and his business associate, Rick Gates, indictment against them, 12 counts, unsealed against them earlier today. We're following the breaking news. We'll bring you the latest on the developments as they happen. Stay close.
This guy's upping his game by listening to an audiobook on Audible. And this guy is just trying to get through the day. This guy feels like he can take on anything. This guy isn't sure he can take it anymore. Unwavering self-confidence. Stuck in a four-door sedan of sadness. Upgrade your commute. Ride with Audible. Dial ** Audible on your smartphone to start listening today.
Hi, I'm Barry Sloan with NewTek, your business solutions company. Does your business need money? Whether you need $10,000 or $10 million, you can count on NewTek, the nation's largest non-bank government-guaranteed lender. NewTek can help your business expand and grow. With a simple phone interview, we can pre-qualify you in just 48 hours. And with rates as low as 6%, you can see why so many businesses turn to NewTek. To see how easy getting a loan can be, contact NewTek, your business solutions company, today.
Managing blood sugar is a series of smart choices. And when you replace one meal or snack a day with Glucerna, made with Carb Steady to help minimize blood sugar spikes, you can really feel it. Now with 30% less carbs and sugars. Glucerna.
Patrick woke up with back pain, but he has work to do, so he took a leave. If he'd taken Tylenol, he'd be stopping for more pills right now. Only Aleve has the strength to stop tough pain for up to 12 hours with just one pill. Aleve, all day strong.
As a working mom, I'm thankful my mom is able to help out. So I bought her the all-new Jitterbug Flip from Great Call.
Get 25% off at Best Buy, Rite Aid, and Sears.
You always pay your insurance on time. Tap one little bumper and up go your rates. What good is having insurance if you get punished for using it? Newsflash, nobody's perfect.
For drivers with accident forgiveness, Liberty Mutual won't raise your rates due to your first accident. Switch and you could save $782 on home and auto insurance. Call 1-888-709-2166 for a free quote today. Liberty stands with you. Liberty Mutual Insurance.
Tonight, the Democratic Party has hijacked the workings of Washington. Our country was sold out.
Powerful coverage on a must-see primetime lineup.
Okay, you're all set, ma'am. Oil's changed, tires rotated.
Rotate them again. Jim, if you can make sure to file these TPS reports before you leave, that'd be great. Light.
Power, strength, success. Everyone wants to be part of it.
I'm not a religious man, but there are some parallels.
It's the key to society. I can't achieve on my own, but together we can.
Okay, we are now within the realm of when this could happen live, so we're watching very closely. The White House press briefing set to take place at any moment now. I can get first reaction now that former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and his business associate Rick Gates have been charged in a 12-count indictment. It includes conspiracy against the United States, conspiracy to launder money, and false statements. But there is no mention of President Trump in this indictment. Want to say that. or of any alleged collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Kayleigh McEnany is a spokesperson for the RNC. Michael Blake is the vice chair for the DNC. Wow, look at that. This will be interesting. Good to have you both. Let's talk about where we are, Kayleigh, with this, because you've seen some from the left now say that there's a connection. And the president tweeting and making it very clear there is no connection between what's happening right now that we know of with Manafort and Gates and the indictment that's come down and the accusations against the Trump campaign of collusion. Your thoughts?
Right. So this has always been a conspiracy theory, this idea of Russian collusion, and today proved that. You know, in addition to the special counsel investigation, which, by the way, as you mentioned, the indictment, the 31 pages never mentions Trump or the campaign or the White House. It's solely the individual business ties of Paul Manafort and Rick Gates. In addition to that, we've had 9 months of congressional investigation, 100,000 pages of documents, 4,000 pages of transcripts, interviews with the Obama administration, with people on the Trump campaign. It's turned up nothing. There is nothing to this baseless theory. It's an effort of the DNC and my counterpart there to thwart the will of the American people and level false charges of Russian collusion where there are none.
So, Michael, in the sense that we just want to get to justice here, what are your thoughts?
Well, let's make sure we're focused on the most important piece. The campaign chairman for Donald Trump's campaign was just indicted on conspiracy against the United States. For us to make it seem like that's a conspiracy theory, as Kayleigh's just saying, is pretty ridiculous and, quite frankly, disrespectful to the American people. Number two, when we talk about the broader conversation, when you have someone as a foreign policy advisor who just said, and I pled guilty, as he just communicated, for what he decided to do, who was in a meeting with Trump, in a meeting with Sessions in March 2016.
George Papadopoulos.
Absolutely. Then for us to make it seem like this is just some other person is also quite ridiculous in itself. So to Kayleigh's point that this proved nothing is absolutely not the case. What it clearly demonstrates is that there is continual concern that exists here. There was regularly dishonesty that was happening. Regularly Trump and his team said none of their associates were being considered under an investigation. That's clearly not the case. And so we want to make sure that Mueller and others continue this investigation.
So, Kayleigh, and I want to explain to everybody, if I'm kind of looking off to the left of the screen, for one thing, I'm keeping my eye on the lectern there, and also Michael is actually in studio with me right now. Kayleigh, I wanted to toggle back to you, though, to give you a chance to respond to Michael.
Yeah, so Michael mentions that Paul Manafort was charged for conspiracy against the United States. That is not Russia collusion. And by the way, conspiracy against the United States, that is because he lied to the Department of Justice about his individual financial ties, and he didn't disclose that he was a foreign agent to the Department of Treasury. That is the thrust of that charge of conspiracy against the United States. It has nothing to do with Russians or collusion or Donald Trump or the Trump campaign. And as for this Papadopoulos character, who was an unpaid advisor, by the way, to the campaign, he had no personal connection with Donald Trump. In fact, there's an August Washington Post story that says that, in fact, when he presented Manafort with the idea of the campaign meeting with Russians, it was rejected by Paul Manafort. In the indictment on page 9 of the charge of offense against Papadopoulos, it says the meetings he was proposing never happened. There were no meetings with Russians. They were rejected. And for you to allege collusion where there is none, it's irresponsible and it's offensive to the will of the American people when they elected Donald Trump.
One more response and then we're going to move on.
It's pretty ridiculous listening to what Kayleigh's saying right here. So to convey someone as an informal advisor is not critical. Paul Manafort was no longer working with the campaign and clearly was still engaged. Corey Lewandowski still clearly engaged. So to try to communicate someone's an informal advisor and therefore they have no engagement is clearly not important. Number two, to the point that was just raised, it just broke within the last 10 minutes that there were attempts and consideration of invitations with Trump officials to meet with Russian officials in Russia last year. So to make it seem like we're just ignoring the core fact here, which is a distraction at that point, the reality is this. There's an investigation that is happening that Donald Trump and his entire associates regularly said that there is absolutely nothing there. And now the chairman of the campaign was just indicted for conspiracy against the United States. And the foreign policy advisor was just pleading guilty for clearly not being honest about those interactions.
So, Kayleigh, one of the things that has been brought up, just to piggyback off of what Michael's saying, is that a lot of what is in this indictment is said to have happened years or some time before Manafort even worked for the campaign. So you're getting that out of the White House, too. And, of course, I want to remind everybody that the questions pertaining to all of these issues are anticipated to come when Press Secretary for the White House steps up, Sarah Sanders steps up to the lectern to the left of your screen. We're watching that very closely because we're now in that time zone where we could see that happen immediately. We'll bring that to you live. But those things that are said to have happened before the campaign, that's an important part of all this. But this is important, too. This is not happening in a vacuum. And if you look at everything that's going on, I mean, there are implications that there were Democrats who were doing some things that they shouldn't have been doing with regard to a Trump dossier and funds that were flowing from the DNC. So not that that's part of this indictment, but it is in kind of the constellation of things happening. Kayleigh?
Sure, and you are absolutely right to bring that up. You know, we've had 10 months of investigating Republicans, and there's nothing that's been turned up that implicates Donald Trump or his campaign with collusion. But there are real questions. Why did John Podesta and Debbie Wasserman Schultz tell Congress privately we had nothing to do with this dossier, and now we find, in fact, they had spent $9 million on this dossier? Why did Hillary Clinton approve 20% of U.S. uranium going to the hands of the Russians when we know they were under FBI investigation now? Why was Tony Podesta, why did he just step down from the Podesta group?
Right. That
why didn't he just disclose he was a foreign agent? Exactly. There are real questions, and I hope maybe Michael can provide some answers, and I hope we start investigating this.
Well, the answers I can provide are, first, that it's interesting to listen to you talk about credibility when the reality is you removed from an RNC document that came out that the first entity that actually did the research was the Washington Free Beacon. That's number one. Free Beacon. That's number one. Number two, it was not the Secretary of State who actually moved forward on Uranium One as has been conveyed.
No, but it was under her watch, and she was one of those 9 agencies. She was the head of one of those 9 agencies.
She was not a part of one of the 9. She was not part of one of the 9 entities that was a part of that. So we have to be clear about that.
So you can continue on, both of you, Kayleigh and Michael. Good to have you today. I knew it would be spicy. The RNC, the DNC, right here on the OT, outnumbered. Overtime. Good to see you. We're awaiting the White House press briefing right now as former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort is set to make his first court appearance and arraignment after being hit with 12 counts inside of an indictment in the Russia probe. This as some Republicans are raising new questions over the fairness of Robert Mueller's investigation into all of this. A GOP congressman will join us live with his take. Stay with us.
Here is something big banks don't want you to know about your IRA or 401k. Store your retirement at home. With the Augusta Home Delivery Gold IRA, you can transfer your current IRA or 401k into approved physical gold and silver coins. No management fees, no depository fees, and you have direct physical control over your IRA because your IRA gold and silver coins will be delivered to your door with free shipping and free insurance. You can store approved coins in your safe at home or in a safety deposit box at your local bank. Augusta Precious Metals is the leader in home delivery gold IRAs. With an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, AA from the BCA, gold and silver have been the family business for over 40 years. Call 800-345-4IRA for our free guide to Augusta Home Delivery Gold IRAs and discover how you can get up to $2,000 in silver free. If you can't hold it, do you really own it?
What average underwear feels like. 1-800-369-8362 or go to tryrevitive.com right now. That's 1-800-369-8362.
You don't have to live with pain. You just have to take the leap and try Revitive.
Experience that I had. The classes, the friends, the independence. And since we've planned for it, that student debt is the one experience I'm glad she'll miss. When you have the right financial advisor, life can be brilliant. Ameriprise.
Fox News Alert, we are awaiting the White House press briefing with new reaction after today's indictments in the Russia investigation, and at any moment now, so simultaneous events right now. Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort is expected to make his first court appearance as he and business partner Rick Gates are facing 12 counts stemming from the Russia probe, an indictment that was unsealed today. So that's the left and right of your screen, what we're watching. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen is live for us at U.S. District Court. James?
Harris, good afternoon. We're expecting the arrival of Paul Manafort and Rick Gates
to enter pleas to these 12 counts of alleged financial crimes that they now face here in federal district court. Earlier today, Manafort and Gates surrendered to federal authorities, namely the FBI. I spoke to a source who had spoken to Paul Manafort twice on Saturday, and as late as Saturday evening, Mr. Manafort still did not believe he was going to be indicted. But we'd all known that there was some indictment or a pair of indictments that had been filed in sealed fashion before the court as early as Friday night, because CNN reported that exclusively at the time, which would appear to be a criminal violation of grand jury secrecy rules. Presumably that will also fall under the aegis or the scope of Special Counsel Mueller for him to investigate. We expect that not guilty pleas will be entered. There is little talk of a guilty plea by either Mr. Manafort, who after all just 48 hours ago didn't think he was going to be indicted, or from Mr. Gates. But we also have the surprise announcement from the special counsel this morning unsealing a guilty plea that had been secured by his team earlier this month. The individual who pleaded guilty was George Papadopoulos, a fairly youthful former national security and foreign policy advisor, I should say, foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. He pleaded guilty earlier this month to lying to FBI agents about the circumstances under which he was in contact with foreign nationals overseas who Mr. Papadopoulos believed were well plugged into the Kremlin and who were promising to deliver to him dirt on Hillary Clinton in the form of thousands of her emails, and in exchange for which these overseas foreign nationals were seeking to set up a meeting between the candidate, Donald Trump, and high-level Russian figures. It's worth noting that in the documents that were released along with Mr. Papadopoulos' guilty plea, they quote one senior campaign official, unnamed, from the Trump campaign, writing to another and saying, in essence, we have to communicate that DT, meaning Donald Trump, is not going to be doing these meetings. So the Trump campaign rebuffed this effort from Russian nationals, one of whom Mr. Papadopoulos believed to be the niece of Vladimir Putin, to set up a meeting with the candidate at that time. I also want to correct, if I may, Harris, one inaccuracy from my reporting on air earlier today. I stated, apparently, according to my detractors on Twitter, that the scope of the Manafort-Gates indictment extends from 2005 to 2015. That is when Mr. Manafort and Gates represented the Ukrainian interests that are at the heart of the indictment. But the indictment also does state that the alleged financial crimes by Mr. Manafort and Gates extended possibly into 2017. Harris.
All right, James, always like for you to set the record straight and come on by and drop some facts as you do so well. Thank you, my friend. Meanwhile, some Republicans stepping up questions over the objectivity of special counsel Robert Mueller's team. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy pointed out that Mueller's staff includes attorneys who've donated to President Obama and Hillary Clinton. And you know what? To my team, I want to skip this because we don't have a lot of time, and I want to get to the congressman who's with me now. Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. We're inside of Nope, couldn't do it. Congressman, we'll bring you back. Sarah Sanders at the White House press briefing. Let's watch together.
I'd like to start the briefing today by addressing a topic that I know all of you are preparing to ask me about, and that's tax reform. A couple of you got it. The initial House tax reform bill will be introduced on Wednesday by the Ways and Means Committee. This is the product of months of work and is now going through an open process in the House. The committee plans to mark up the bill next week, starting on Monday. The House is likely to consider the bill week of November 13th. In order to stay on pace, we want to see a House bill passed by Thanksgiving. This is a very aggressive timeline, but one that will help us get tax cuts this year so families and businesses can plan for 2018. We look forward to the details of the tax bill being released on Wednesday, but today I want to take a step back and explain what we're working to do using an anecdote we can all understand. This story has been floating around the internet for a while, and it's important to keep in mind that the numbers are not exact, and I'm also not encouraging any drinking. So file that away. It's mostly for my parents. But I think you'll enjoy it. Suppose that every day 10 people, for our purposes, we'll say reporters, go out for beer, and the bill for all 10 comes to $100. If these 10 reporters paid their tab every night the way we pay our taxes, it would go something like this. The first 4, the poorest, would pay nothing. The 5th would pay $1. The 6th would pay $3. The 7th would pay $7. The 8th would pay $12. The 9th would pay $18. The 10th, the richest, would pay $59. So that's what they decided to do. The 10 reporters drank in the bar every day and seemed quite happy with the arrangement until one day the bar owner threw them a curveball. "Since you're all such good customers," he said, "I'm going to reduce the cost of your daily beer by $20. Drinks for the 10 reporters would now cost just $80. The group still wanted to pay their bill the way we pay our taxes, so the first 4 were unaffected. They would still drink for free. But what about the other 6? How could they divide the $20 windfall so that everyone would get their fair share? These are the reporters after all, so they're concerned with fairness. They realize that $20 divided by 6 is $3.33. But if they subtracted that from everybody's share, then the 5th reporter and the 6th reporter which would each end up being paid to drink beer. So the bar owner suggested that it would be fair to reduce each man's bill by a higher percentage the poorer he was. By doing that, he explained, they'd continue following the principle of the tax system they'd been using. So he proceeded to work out the amounts he suggested that each should pay now. And so the 5th reporter, like the first 4, now paid nothing. He got a 100% saving. The 6th now paid $2 instead of $3, a 33% saving. The 7th now paid $5 instead of $7, a 28% saving. The 8th now paid $9 instead of $12, a 25% saving. The 9th now paid $14 instead of $18, which was a 22% saving. And the 10th now paid $49 instead of $59, a 16% saving. So each of the 6 was better off than before, and the first 4 continued to drink for free. But once outside the bar, the reporters began to compare their savings. "I only got $1 out of the $20 saving," declared the 6th reporter, and she pointed to the 10th reporter. "He got 10. "Yes, that's right," exclaimed the 5th reporter. "I only saved $1 too. It's unfair that he received 10 times more benefit than me." "That's true," shouted the 7th reporter. "Why should he get $10 back when I only got 2? The wealthy gets all the breaks." "Wait a minute," yelled the first 4 reporters in unison. "We didn't get anything at all. This new tax system exploits the poor." The 9 reporters yelled at the 10th and made him feel bad. So the next night, the 10th man didn't show up for drinks, and the 9 sat down and had their beers without him. But when it came time to pay the bill, they discovered something important. They no longer had enough money between them all to even cover half of the bill. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how our tax system works. The people who already paid the highest taxes will naturally benefit from a tax reduction, but not the largest percent benefit. Taxing them too much, attack them, and they might start drinking overseas where the atmosphere is somewhat friendlier. This is a silly story, of course, but it illustrates some very important points. Our tax cuts and reforms will create a fairer system that works better for everyone, and it will make our country the friendliest in the world for American families trying to build a better life for themselves and their children, and for American companies seeking a competitive edge. And I'll be happy to get that story to everybody so that you can get those numbers later. Again, I know that that may be an oversimplification, but I think it paints a very good picture of the tax system. And with that, I'll take your questions.
Sarah? Sarah, first I'd like to get the White House reaction to the indictments of Paul Manafort and Rick Gates and the plea agreement with George Papadopoulos. And specifically, I know we have heard a couple of tweets from the president. If you can help me understand, when he says, "Why aren't crooked Hillary and the Dems the focus?" Is the president saying that Special Counsel Mueller should really be investigating Hillary Clinton and the Democrats? And is he going to rule out once and for all firing Robert Mueller?
Look, I'll address the second question first. The President said last week, I believe it was last week, and I've said several times before, there's no intention or plan to make any changes in regards to special counsel. But look, today's announcement has nothing to do with the President, has nothing to do with the President's campaign or campaign activity. The real collusion scandal, as we've said several times before, has everything to do with the Clinton campaign, Fusion GPS, and Russia. There's clear evidence of the Clinton campaign colluding with Russian intelligence to spread disinformation and smear the president to influence the election. We've been saying from day one there's been no evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, and nothing in the indictment today changes that at all.
But the George Papadopoulos agreement is about the campaign. It is specifically about the campaign.
It has nothing to do with the activities of the campaign. It has to do with his failure to tell the truth. That doesn't have anything to do with the campaign or the campaign's activities.
But it is the clearest evidence yet of ties between the Trump campaign and Russian officials. So.
Again, there are no activities or official capacity in which the Trump campaign was engaged in any of these activities. Most of them took place well before the campaign ever even existed. John?
Sarah, can you just explain what George Papadopoulos' role with the campaign was?
It was extremely limited. It was a volunteer position. And again, no activity was ever done in an official capacity on behalf of the campaign in that regard.
What about the outreach that he was making to campaign officials to try to put together this
You
meeting?
mean that outreach that was repeatedly denied and pushed away and said we're not going to take any action on that?
Can you explain what happened with his outreach?
He reached out and nothing happened beyond that, which I think shows, one, his level of importance in the campaign, and two, shows what little role he had within coordinating anything officially for the campaign.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. I wanted to ask about Mr. Mueller's investigation. The president at times has called it a hoax, and he's called it a witch hunt. You've used similar type of language before as it relates to his investigation. Last week you indicated, Sarah, that you believe that Mr. Mueller is wrapping up his investigation. And I've heard similar things coming from other senior administration officials. Do you still believe that Mr. Mueller is in the process of wrapping up his investigation?
We still expect this to conclude soon. Yes. Francesca?
Thank you, Sarah. Paul Manafort was high-ranking in the president's campaign at one time. I'd like to know what the president's relationship is with him now. Do they still talk? When was the last time they might have had contact?
As far as we can tell, we know that they haven't spoken in several months. The last known conversation was back all the way to February. And as far as anything beyond that, with Paul, I'm not sure of any other contact. I know that there was some initial contact after the president was sworn in with him at meetings here at the White House, but nothing directly with the president. Deborah?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. On March 31, according to the affidavit by Mr. Papadopoulos, he attended a foreign policy meeting. The president was there. He said that he talked about how that Russia wanted to talk to the president. What did the president think when he said he wanted to arrange a meeting between Trump and Putin? And how did other people in the campaign react to that?
I'm not sure that the president recalls specific details of the meeting. Again, it was a brief meeting that took place quite some time ago. It was the one time that group ever met. And beyond that, I really don't have anything to add. John, Gizzy?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. As you mentioned, Mr. Manafort, Mr. Gates were named in this for things not having anything to do with the campaign, but with alleged money laundering regarding other business. Now, under those circumstances, would the president consider or rule out pardoning either of them?
I haven't had any conversations with him about that. I think we should let the process play through before we start looking at those steps. And
Papadopoulos at this time was referring to Jeff Sessions at the time, who was overseeing Trump's Foreign Policy Advisory Committee. What does this mean for Jeff Sessions?
Somebody on a volunteer committee, I'm not sure how that would impact the Attorney General directly.
Can you say, given what we have learned over the last few hours, can you say when the president was first aware that Russia was behind the hacking and was in the possession of emails, what they consider to be damaging emails about the Clinton campaign that they were trying to get to the Trump campaign? When was he first aware of that?
I'm not sure of the specific date of when that took place, so I'd have to look into back.
Sarah, does the president regret having hired Paul Manafort to be his campaign manager? And is he and the rest of the White House concerned that this issue will distract from tax reform and the other domestic policy and foreign policy?
We're not worried about it distracting because it doesn't have anything to do with us, because this is something that is action that took place outside of the campaign or campaign activity.
And as far as whether he regrets having hired him to be a campaign manager?
I didn't ask him that question specifically.
Sir, how can you describe Mr. Papadopoulos as having a limited role when there's a photograph of Mr. Papadopoulos sitting at a table with candidate Trump?
Thousands of photographs with millions of people.
And, he was also cited by then candidate Trump in a meeting with the Washington Post as to who his top foreign policy advisors are. That seems to fight against what you're saying. And also, how is it not collusion when George Papadopoulos is in contact with various people who are promising dirt on Hillary Clinton? A series of events that closely mirrors what occurred with the president's own son.
This individual was on a...
in pursuit of information that was damaging about the Clintons. How is all of that not collusion?
Look, this individual was the member of a volunteer advisory council that met one time over the course of a year, and he was part of a list that was read out in the Washington Post. I'd hardly call that some sort of regular advisor, or as you want to, push that he's like a senior member of the staff. He was not paid by the campaign. He was a volunteer on a council that met once.
Collusion activities, Sarah. He was pursuing information from the Russians.
Again, he was a volunteer. I think that's something you need to ask him. I'm not here to speak on behalf of the thousands of people that may have volunteered on the campaign.
Believe it or not, I have a question on this, but also on tax reform. The president has called on Congress to investigate Hillary Clinton. Is he confident that they will do that?
I think that's a question you have to ask Congress, but I think that there are enough reports and enough information out there that seems to suggest it might not be a bad idea.
Congressional leaders of committees.
I don't know if he's had a member of Congress specifically tell him that they're planning.
My question about tax reform is where does the president stand on the idea of phasing in the corporate tax cut so it would reach 20% sometime around 2022?
I think the president's been clear that his priority is to make sure that that's where we start with the tax plan currently. I think, again, he's laid out what his principles are. As of right now, that hasn't changed, and don't anticipate that it will. Major?
Sir, just so we have the terminology straight, when you say George Papadopoulos had no official capacity, what do you mean by that?
I mean, he was a volunteer on the campaign and a volunteer member of an advisory council that met one time.
So these activities were entirely of his invention. No one asked him to do any of these things. Is that what you're telling the American public?
I'm telling you that he was a volunteer member of an advisory council that literally met one time.
What I ask is now there are two episodes in which people associated with the campaign at a rather high level, at least in one instance, and George Papadopoulos is a member of a foreign policy or military advisory committee, sought dirt on Hillary Clinton from people representing themselves as either linked to or associated with the Russian government. Is that just a coincidence?
The only interaction I'm aware of that deals with this individual was him reaching out and being repeatedly denied. So that's all I can tell you is he asked to do things, he was basically pushed back or not responded to in any way. So any actions that he took would have been on his own, and you'd have to ask him about those because I can't answer.
Later activities of the campaign to have that same kind of meeting at Trump Tower.
I'm sorry?
What explains the campaign's later involvement with those associated with the Russian government, or said they were, to get dirt on Hillary Clinton later in the campaign?
And we've addressed that. They took one meeting, nothing came of it. No, I don't believe so.
That does not indicate a pattern of trying to obtain that information from that government.
A pattern of getting information about your opponent? No. The big difference here is you have a meeting that took place versus millions of dollars being sent to create fake information to actually influence the election. You compare those two, those are apples and oranges. What the Clinton campaign did, what the DNC did, was actually exchange money. They took a meeting. Those are far different, and one is pretty common practice in any campaign to take a meeting. The other one is actually paying money for false information. That's a big deal and a big difference.
Thanks, Sarah. I have two questions for you, but first, if I could follow up on your comment there about the GPS dossier. This is an issue that many senior-level administration officials have pointed to during these questions about the special counsel. Has the White House asked the Department of Justice to look into this issue?
Not that I'm aware of.
Can I follow up on Mueller? You've spoken with the president today?
Yes, I have.
Can you give us a little bit about his reaction to the news this morning? Obviously, news that swept the nation's capital. But how did the president respond to this news about two people who did work for his campaign? Or was he disappointed that Paul Manafort received this news today that he was being charged on these 12 counts?
He responded the same way the rest of us in the White House have, and that's without a lot of reaction because it doesn't have anything to do with us.
Sarah, we are now talking about two of the most senior members of the campaign at a very pivotal time, through and including the RNC last year, who are now under federal indictment
for something
very
they did
serious crimes
outside
that
of the campaign.
They did not allegedly conduct. during their work for the campaign. But doesn't it speak to the president's judgment that he would choose to have these two individuals in very high positions, having allegedly committed these crimes in the years leading up to their roles?
These were seasoned operatives, not you make it sound like they were regular offenders that have been in massive amounts of trouble. These were seasoned operatives that worked on a number of campaigns. Paul Manafort was brought in to lead the delegate process, which he did, and was dismissed not too long after that.
And the president has no regrets.
Again, I didn't ask him that question specifically. April.
What leads you to believe that the Mueller investigation will conclude soon? Do you also believe that there could be more indictments? And my third question on another subject, welfare reform. The president talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and I've been trying to find out what is the focus, how do you plan to implement welfare reform?
We haven't made any specific announcements when it comes to welfare reform. Those are ongoing conversations, and we're looking at ways to improve the system, but nothing specific to roll out at this time. Sorry, what was the first part of your question?
The first one, what leads you to believe that this will conclude soon, the Mueller investigation? Have you been given a heads up? What?
Those are the indications that we have at this time. I can't go any further than that.
Indications from who and where? Sarah, indications from where?
As I just said, I can't go any further.
And also, what about, you don't believe there'll be any more indictments at all?
That's a question you'd have to ask Robert Mueller.
You're saying that it's going to be concluded soon.
I still attend that we believe that it will be concluded soon, but beyond that, I don't have anything else to add on a specific time frame. Right here.
Sarah, in March, the president called March 2016, the president called George Papadopoulos an excellent guy. Does he still believe that Papadopoulos is an excellent guy?
Look, he was referring to the council. He was going through the list of names with the Washington Post, and nothing more than that, and complimentary of the people that were volunteering on behalf of the campaign.
Papadopoulos told the FBI that a campaign supervisor told him, "I would encourage you to make the trip to Russia if feasible." How does that not constitute the campaign encouraging him to make contact with
I'm not aware of that conversation, so I can't speak to that.
Sir, at the end of the day, is there any concern at all from this administration, again, trying to drill down on what was asked earlier, that two people who worked for the president are now under indictment? One has pleaded guilty, and he promised to hire only the best people. Is this an example of the best people to hire?
Look, again, this goes back to these were activities that took place outside of the scope of the campaign. I can't comment on anything they did.
But are these the best people to hire?
Look, the president hired Paul Manafort to handle the delegate process, which he did, and he was dismissed not too long after that.
Sarah, last week the administration opposed a federal judge's decision that allowed an undocumented teen immigrant to have an abortion. Now that that case is over, it's been decided she's had that abortion. What is the White House reaction to that decision, and does it set a dangerous precedent going forward?
I can't comment on the specifics of that at this point.
Case at all? Did he comment on it?
I didn't speak directly with him about the case. Ronnie.
Sarah, thank you. I'd like to ask you about a different topic. Just breaking before the briefing, court banned the president from changing military policy on service by transgender people. What's the reaction from the White House and the plan moving forward with reference to this?
Obviously, this is something just announced. The Department of Justice has it. They're reviewing it, and I'd refer you them to any specific questions.
Congressman Gowdy this weekend had suggested that there should be an investigation into the leaks of the grand jury investigation or Robert Mueller's investigation. Do you think there should be an investigation? Are you all asking for an investigation?
We haven't asked for that investigation to take place.
What, an investigation?
I think that any time there is leaking of sensitive information, it should be looked into, but beyond that, we don't have any comment. Kristen?
Sarah, thanks. Does the president in any way hold Jared Kushner responsible for hiring Paul Manafort? After all, he was an early supporter of bringing him on board.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And Sarah, to just follow up on the point of hiring the best people, the top people, he said, does this not at the very least raise questions about President Trump's vetting process and judgment when it comes to bringing on these people?
I don't believe so. I think I've answered that quite a few times today.
Sarah, two quick questions. To the president, you said back in July that the president believed that the investigation for the special counsel should stay within the confines of Russian election meddling. Given what we've learned today, does the president believe Bob Mueller overstepped the boundaries of his investigation?
I haven't spoken with him specifically about that detail.
Okay, my second question, Sarah, would just be on the topic of regarding the plea agreement with George Papadopoulos. You've indicated the president did not remember that March 31st meeting, the photograph, right?
No, I didn't say he didn't remember the meeting. I said he didn't remember those comments from.
Did he remember anything about that meeting, his interactions with Papadopoulos, given that he's talked about his great memory?
I don't believe that he went into detail about the meeting itself. He remembers it taking place, but we didn't go into anything beyond that or any specifics.
And specifically did not remember the Russia comment? Did you remember Papadopoulos' presence? Did they have interaction?
Not that I'm aware of.
Gallup just came out with a poll giving 33% approval, 62% disapproval to the president. What's your reaction? Is the president aware of this? Any plans of changing anything?
Look, we're focused aggressively on pushing forward on a very bold agenda specific to tax reform, tax cuts. I think that the economy continuing to grow and strengthen is something that will certainly change those numbers. But at the same time, I think these are some of the same polls that also said this president would never be president, so I don't have a lot of confidence in them.
Sarah?
Take one last question.
Can you please clarify? Sorry, can you please clarify your answer tomorrow? The stock market is moving downwards on this news that possibly the corporate rate could be phased in over several years. I wasn't sure if you were trying to make the point that the president would be for a phase-in or against a phase-in.
No, I said that the president laid out his principles, and it doesn't include the phasing in, so we're still committed to that moving forward. But and I don't have any reason to believe we have changes on that front at this point.
So the red line of a 20% corporate
I'm not
rate
drawing
tax
a
cut.
red line. I'm just saying those are the principles that we've laid out, and we haven't adjusted or changed our principles since this process started. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good day.
We've been watching the White House press briefing. Obviously, they covered what we thought they would, the reaction that the president and the White House would have to the indictments against his former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, and his business associate. Joining me now on set is Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin. He serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I want to come to you first on this in the last couple of minutes of the hour that we have, because you said something that made an impression on me as we were watching this together. You said the indictments are a good thing. Why?
In order to wrap up all the special counsel work, I don't think you want to wait another year or two for Manafort and Gates to get in trouble for what they've done over the course of the last decade. File the indictment. This is a bad day for Manafort and Gates. They get their day in court. They may end up ultimately owing a debt to society. These are serious allegations. It's a detailed indictment. But you don't want the special counsel work going on for 2 years with this big cloud when you're working on something like this. So it's good to get it off the table.
And you heard what Sarah Sanders was just saying, is that the president had basically no reaction to this. She said, because this doesn't, and I'm going to quote her here, have anything to do with us at the White House.
Well, that's correct. And reading the indictment, this isn't about the president. They're not talking about the Trump campaign. They are not making connections to other named officials with the president and people around him. This is an activity that started over a decade ago. This is separate from the president.
Congressman, can I ask you a question, though? And you saw it there a couple of times asked different ways. I'll be more blunt with it. Did the campaign have a vetting issue?
Well, they were understaffed. The president wasn't out raising a ton of money. He was bringing his message directly to the voters in all these primary states, holding big rallies and bringing people to the cause, and he wasn't focused on raising a lot of money for a big, huge staff like Hillary Clinton did. And this is one of the problems with having a really small staff, but he was also very efficient in getting his message out.
All right. One of the other things that Sanders was asked about, which is something that you and I talked about over the weekend, or actually Friday night, I think it was, you voted no on the budget, which would have halted tax reform and the movement of it the way that it is now, so you'd have more time to talk about taking those state and local tax deductions here in New York. Tax reform came up with Sarah Sanders, a phase-in corporate tax over 5 years. Does that get it done? Is that what the president promised would make America great again?
Well, I haven't seen this proposal. The proposal that I know is that we were going down to 20%. If there's a change, I'd be looking forward to get briefed on it. I think that the sooner we could get to 20%, the better. It would be great for our economy. Our economy's done great in 2017. It can do better in 2018. Consumer spending is up. We saw new numbers today. I want to see them go higher. GDP, 2 consecutive quarters at 3%. It can continue, but we have to improve the business climate as much as possible, as quickly as possible.
I bet you would like for the president to be focusing his tweets on that. I've heard some Republicans say, yeah, tweet about the economy right now and let the Justice Department and others do what they got to do.
And he does, and he will continue. He plays a really important role in making sure tax cuts get done before the end of this year.
Congressman Zeldin, thank you of New York for coming in and being with us here in person. Thanks a lot for joining us on Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris, and in just a few seconds, we'll be wrapping up with Dana with the Daily Briefing. Watch.
Fox News Alert, White House briefing just wrapping up.